I was 21 when I was planning my mother's funeral. And they were telling
That's
me, so
hard.
Jewish, right? So we don't embalm, but the cemetery required me at the time to purchase a vault, like a concrete vault,
Yep.
and for several
Yep.
$1,000s. And as a
Yep.
21-year-old, I just didn't understand, like, it's not very green.
To your experience of having to purchase a concrete vault, that's kind of the default that you fall into. And you're just like, well, I guess I have to do it, right? And you pay the thousands of dollars and you've contributed to this underground apartment building that no one will
Oh
ever
my
see.
gosh, you just, how poignant. The underground apartment building nobody wanted.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Niki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact.
And welcome back to another episode of the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. My guest today is HK, and we met back in fall of 2025, and this was at the Life and Death in New York City. This was like a fascinating event where people, not just from the death care space, but also community members came, and you have an interesting project, and I wanted to get you on the call and welcome. Share with us what got you here today.
Thank you so much. I know it was such a lovely event where I met you, and I loved just kind of like, I mean, this is what's great about in-person events, right? Like as we move through this digital age where there's serendipitous kind of conversations and connections that you can make and, have similar values and similar like kind of, priorities that we want to get out. So I agree with you. I think it was fantastic to get to meet you. I really appreciate it. Um, Thanks for inviting me to your podcast, MHK. I'm in the process of trying to start conservation cemeteries near large population centers. So one outside of New York,
In New York City
in the Hudson
specifically.
Valley, New York City.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. New York City makes it very difficult to start new cemeteries, as you might imagine.
Oh, tell
So,
us, what are some
um,
of the challenges in these metropolitan areas?
well, yeah, yeah. So obviously, premium in a lot of very dense cities. And so the legislature makes it very restrictive. New York State makes it very restrictive in particular. Like starting new cemeteries is governed on a state by state basis. So certain states have very few laws, if any at all. Like South Carolina has very few. Um, so it's very easy to get up and running in a state like that, whereas New York and a lot of the Northeast makes it very bureaucratic and somewhat cumbersome to kind of go through the process to start a new cemetery, which is largely why it's hard to kind of have innovative solutions in certain places. So what I'm trying to do with a conservation cemetery is basically marry natural burial with land conservation through a third party conservation easement with a land trust. And it's basically just going back to we've done burials for thousands or tens of thousands of years, which is, like let the body return naturally to the earth, feed the earth, let the trees grow, help the pollinators, the birds, the animals, all of that stuff, and just kind of have our last act be a part of the full cycle of life.
And living in New York City, you just said New York is probably the hardest place, and then here you are in New York City. So, what had you come up with this idea? And look, you and I talk about people in this space. We are on a mission, and it's a mission that we can't
Yes.
always describe how we received the instructions, but here we are. So, for you, what was your
Yeah.
story? How did you receive it?
Yeah. It's a great question. Many people, to your point, of our space because of a personal experience that kind of has transformed them. So someone very close, has passed away and they kind of helped manage end of life as well as funeral arrangements and things like that. And that's kind of what awakens, this desire to bring death back into life, for a lot of people. That is not what happened to me. It's almost kind of like the opposite, which is from almost like an actuarial standpoint where, I'm in my 40s and I have never had, you know, this will happen to me 100%, but like I haven't yet in my life have had to encounter any really tough scenarios with
A
death,
significant death.
with deep grief.
So your
Yeah,
parents
with
are
a
still
significant,
around, no
they're still
best
my siblings,
friends,
my best
children.
friends, everyone's alive. Thank God. However, I know it's just a matter of time, right? Like there's no cheating death. So, so it's one of those things where it's like from a just pure probabilistic perspective, it made no sense to me that death was just not in my life when we all know every single person dies. And culturally, it felt problematic that a lot of the stories that I hear from friends and others that have kind of gone through this, especially now that I'm in the death industry, I just see and witness kind of like the loneliness, the inability to really be open as to, your own grief or your experience on others in case it's a burden to them. When in reality, just 100 years ago or so, it was very normal for grieving to be very much in the forefront of society, right? Like people used to dress in black for X number of weeks or months or years after a significant other. Or there used to be, little trinkets or whatever, like made out of hair of the deceased that there as ornamentation. So it used to be a part of culture. I mean, mainly because, or one of the reasons being, it was much more common back then. And so I'm grateful that it's not common. We've had all the advances in science and health. However, all of the current forces just kind of hide death in the background. And it just doesn't sit right with me,
So is this, so you haven't had any significant deaths, and yet the land preservation, it was just an idea that came to you to say there are, in the state of New York, how many green burial cemeteries are there? Or natural burial, what do we
There,
call it? I'm sorry, you
yeah,
have to correct me on my term,
right.
on the nomenclature.
No, no, it's okay.
Green burials versus conservation cemeteries, like what is the terms that we should be aware of?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great point. Green burial is a term that's used kind of as an umbrella term to mean something that's an alternative to conventional, you know, either alternative to conventional embalming, fancy casket, vault burial, or an alternative to traditional like cremation, fire cremation, right? So green burial is kind of being used loosely, but within the actual burial spectrum of things. So, not talking about alternatives to cremation, which are human composting, water cremation, and a few other kind of alternatives over there. Within natural burial, there's kind of like three levels. The most accessible is hybrid, which is um, a conventional cemetery setting aside a section to allow for natural burials, which is no embalming, no fancy caskets, routed or in a plain box, like that kind of thing. Um, there's a natural burial ground, which will be the entire cemetery is practices all natural burial. And then the third is what I'm going for, which is kind of the most extreme conservation burial, which accounts for both burial as well as the above ground caretaking of the land and stewarding the ecology, so that you're restoring native plants or getting rid of invasives and ensuring that you're making as big of a climate impact as you can within the grounds of that cemetery.
So how many are currently located?
Yeah,
Should we do by region, by state?
sure. Yeah, so conservation burial, the most extreme one, again, which is what I'm attempting to do. There's 16 or 18 currently in the United States, which is not many at all. This movement started in the 90s. So 1998 is when the first one opened. So, so, to your point about terminology, you could call this the most traditional burial, that we have, right? If you think about what we've done for thousands of years, up until about 150 years ago when everything just kind of became more industrialized. And now we're kind of going back to the original way that we did it. So there's only 16 or 18 of them, under 20 for sure, in the US. And then there are more and more natural burial grounds, as well as there's, hundreds of hybrids now. Because there's a public demand for a more environmental option, um, there are more conventional cemeteries that are opening up, separate sections or separate services specifically to cater to, the modern consumer actually that might want it. So from a, entry to bear perspective, that's the easiest one, right? Like you don't have to go off and try to start a whole new conservation or sorry, a whole new burial ground for it. In New York, to your question, in New York specifically, I mean, I think there's like two natural burial grounds right now that are exclusively, natural burial. One is um, something like 70 or 80 acres, and the other one is less than 10. It's what I know about and I'm very familiar with. There are several hybrid sections in conventional, but again, however, like it's kind of a question as to how much it's being promoted and whether or not, um, beyond the, lack of the toxic embalming fluids and whatever, like whether there's a huge impact to the broader ecology from those cemeteries. But I'm glad that they exist. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, it's a huge undertaking that you've, passionately kind of moving towards. And then the idea is, what is the process that you're going through right now and how receptive is the state of New York? Like, why wouldn't they want to do something
yeah,
like this?
yeah, yeah. So, the process is lengthy and cumbersome. So,
And you knew
thankfully
that
through
going
this
in.
process, well, so yes and no, in that, like, I mean, this is the thing with starting any new endeavor, right? You just kind of like your eyes get open to this vision, and you're like, oh wow, I'm going to throw all my resources behind making this happen as quickly as possible because as soon as you get one done, then maybe you can move on to a second one. However, what I'm working with is, state and local legislature and profits. So it's just, and if you think about kind of like town level zoning and all of these things that kind of vary just everywhere, right? Like, um, it all kind of stacks up. And so things take a long time as a result. It's like putting together like a very complex puzzle, which is kind of a fun part of it,
Well, for
slash,
you.
is somewhat for me, but it can be very
Yeah, I was
frustrating
going to
from
say
a,
this is what you now, you have a very specific skill set. You know, looking at your resume and LinkedIn profile. So I get you, but at the same time, you're mission driven.
yes, exactly. So I mean, I've always had, or rather, I started my career in an area where I really wanted to have an impact on climate. Um, I interned at the EPA during college, and I worked at the Office of Air, where we were like greenhouse gas emissions database across the world. So what we were doing was taking all of the industrial activities country by country and estimating what the different types of greenhouse gases were being emitted and what the amount was, right? And just putting together this giant database so we could come up with a target for, what would it take to reduce, country by country, just kind of and get countries to voluntarily commit to reducing it. So like I was a part of this project and it just kind of opened my eyes and it became the most important thing to me. And so I did everything that I could after the summer, came back to college. I tried to get like an environmental engineering program started at my school. I started learning Japanese because the path that I wanted to take in this was at kind of like the international level with the International Panel on Climate Action or Climate Change. There was there was a program that was happening in Kyoto, Japan, that I was applying for after graduation. So anyway, like I basically like
The
aligned
journey.
my
No,
life.
I mean
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
as a founder, we're on a journey, and you are
Yes, yes.
amazing.
Yeah, and then it didn't happen, right? Like it's just like our government decided that we were not going to participate in reducing, global greenhouse gases at that point in time. It's all about timing too, right? Like, from a business perspective, how important timing is. And so it just kind of like crushed me. And then I kind of went off on, a separate career path, in
I can't
finance, nothing
save
to
the
do with
planet.
environment.
Find a way to kill us more, or
Yeah,
bury, not kill, but
exactly.
final disposition in a more green way, right? You basically
Right,
took
right.
your passion and just found a different purpose.
Exactly. Yeah. So it had felt very daunting to figure out how to make an impact. And then it's taken me multiple decades, since that time to come to this project where I'm just like, oh, wait, there is a tangible way. And it's not just solving for, a climate problem. It's also solving for a social issue that we have, as you very well aware, that that it's that the process is broken, like depending on your background, your culture, your religion, whatever. Like there might be kind of guidance, but overall there is this overarching kind of industrial profit driven pressure at end of life. And so there's like the social aspect of it, which to people that I thought I could help solve. And that's how the cemetery kind of came about.
So, do you have a little historical background? I'm like fascinated. Like, how did we get here? Like, how did we get to the point where cemeteries have become just concrete villages, and
Yeah.
and then we just kept building from there. What I'm thinking of, so family's Jewish. I remember when I
Yes.
was planning my mother's funeral. I was 21 when I was planning my mother's funeral, and they were telling
That's
me, so
hard.
Jewish, right? So we don't embalm,
Correct. Yep.
but the cemetery required me at the time to purchase a vault, like a concrete vault,
Yep.
and for several
Yep.
$1,000s. And as a 21
Yep.
year old, I just didn't understand, like, it's not very green. It
No.
Any idea
Yeah.
based on your
Yeah. I'm
go
happy
go?
to talk about that.
Like, I just don't get it.
Um, I
We're
know.
natural
I know.
beings.
It's
We should
so
go back into the earth, and yet we have somehow,
right.
in the last, what you said, 150 years.
Correct.
Go
Yes.
ahead, please share.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Well, and I want to address uh, the the practices of Jewish burial, of Muslim burial, and a lot of Catholic burial that really emphasizes going back to the earth. Like we came from the earth, let's go back to the earth, right? Like it makes a lot of sense if you stop and think about it. So there's an aspect of it that makes absolute sense. From a legislative perspective, there's no state that requires it is a policy that is imposed upon by the cemeteries. And the reason, so I'll talk about the vaults very specifically and then just talk about the industry a little bit more broadly. The vaults are there largely to prevent
Cave-ins,
the lawn
right? I mean, sort
from
of
sinking in. So
have a
it's very,
level.
yeah, you walk into a cemetery, usually a very beautiful, like perfect lawn, with all this green grass, sparse trees here and there. Um, and you have very large machinery that has to kind of like drive over these cemeteries. And so you don't want the machinery that takes care of the lawn, but also, is like the digger brings the concrete like vaults in. That's uh, some of, I read an article about some cemetery having like the largest lawnmower in all of America. You know what I mean? Like, so that's what that serves to ensure the beauty of that cemetery. But just taking a step back, death care, similar to birth, for the longest time has been the job of the women in a community, right? It's usually the women within a village that have taken the, the privilege and the burden to basically help move along um, very important phases of life, right? And so it used to be something that was very specific to that community and, small and not profit driven. I mean, what really kicked off this current version of industrial, um, funeral process has been the start of embalming during the Civil War, which was basically, the boys went off to war, they'd die in the field, and the desire would be to have those children essentially kind of be brought back home for a final burial and resting within their churchyard or family grave or whatever. And so a whole industry popped up, just kind of like ragtag of all these people that are just like, oh, we know how to preserve so that we can ensure that your child is returned back home, right? And so there were all these people that would set up like tents on the outskirts of battlefields and selling essentially like a pre-bought or pre-sale, pre-death, uh, service to if the person died, they were paid for their embalming and shipping back home. And so
Like a
once
roadside
that
service.
started, exactly. Yes.
I'm
Yes.
thinking
And
like
that's
of
how
a
like
food
dog
truck,
tag.
kind of like they would just, right? They would just set up.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where like the military dog tags came
Right.
into being as well. It's so they could easily be
Identify.
identified, right? Like whoever, paid for this, prepaid for the service. Um, and then, the people that used to make caskets or coffins or whatever used to be the town carpenter that would make your cabinets or whatever. They would also like make a casket if needed. Um, and so there was this whole kind of set of realizations where these people, when these types of new services have been provided, realized that there was an opportunity to kind of take this funeral process and move it outside of the home, including what used to happen in America, where if someone died, there would be a wake, there would be someone set of and visitations that would happen in the parlor of your home,
And people have to understand
and
this is
that kind of
before funeral homes, so they called it the
correct.
parlor because that's where the decedent would be displayed.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And then the funeral homes would, provide the service of like, oh, hey, you don't have to do it in your
Right.
home. We'll take it out of the home and you can have this room back and you can call it the living room, right? Because living people hang out there now instead of the dead being, laid out in a parlor. So a whole industry came up, and so they organized a set of kind of gatekeeping started to happen to standardize services and standardize, I guess, the level of um, professionalism that was being applied to this. And then kind of just like fast forward, several decades, it had become such an organized industry where where the public was basically convinced to be like, oh, hey, there are people that are experts, they know how to handle it, just like leave it to them, kind of thing, right? And so to your experience of having to purchase a concrete vault, that's a particular cemetery that's not required by the law. Um, and unless someone pre-planned and pre-looked to, right, like different options, that's kind of the default that you fall into. And you're just like, well, I guess I have to do it, right? And you pay the thousands of dollars and you've contributed to this underground apartment building that no one will
Oh
ever
my
see.
gosh, you just, how poignant. The underground apartment building nobody wanted.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, that's where the
that's so
conversations
true.
need to come in. So,
Yes.
and these are poignant conversations. My biggest pet peeve is when I ask someone, "What's your plan?" And the response is,
Right.
dead is dead. What do I care? They'll figure it out.
I know. Yeah, I mean, there's a human instinct to not talk about things that will make you sad, but then it's almost like the industry capitalizes on it. And
Predatory. Some of them are
you
predatory.
exactly, exactly. And a lot of funeral homes have been family businesses generation after generation. You know, it's one of the few industries where it's still very much family run. It's about 75% of the industry is still family run, but it's quickly changing, where you have large corporate conglomerations as well as private equity firms that have a profit driven reason to kind of like buy out these funeral homes, make them, they'll keep the original name, they'll keep hopefully original kind of like employees so that it still seems like it's a part of the community. I mean, it is still a part of the community, but kind of behind the scenes, what they're doing is they're making operations more efficient, which, there's nothing wrong with efficiency. However, they're charging the public something like 30% more for the same exact thing that they're doing at a cost because they were able to consolidate operations. And so it just um, feels like, again, a thing that we've given up over time. And I think what you and I are witnessing, in pockets perhaps, people kind of seeing how irrational this is and being like, wait, this doesn't make any sense. And then they'll start asking the questions and then they'll start looking into it a little bit more. So I'm hoping that tide is, turning right now. I think it's been building for a little while to kind of take back uh, really human, right? Death is just such a normal part of
Part of living is
it.
part of
It's
living is dying. Right.
exactly, and it seems just have to like state that, but uh, just taking that back rather than kind of handing over all the power and all the money, over to these corporations.
But here you are on the mission for conservation cemetery. So
Yes.
if things go as you planned, what is that timeline?
Yes.
When can you put your shingle up? When can people start to say,
Yeah.
put it? Look, if someone died tomorrow in the New York
Yeah.
City area, what options do they have?
Well, so I've been grateful to field a few of those phone calls, which is what's amazing about, the digital age that we're in, where people can Google, where are their natural grounds and then, find the Conservation Burial Alliance and give a call. And, sometimes that gets forwarded to me if they're in the New York area. So I can talk through with people. Um, the larger natural burial ground in New York is like 5 hours away from the city. Some people opt for it because they really believe in the mission. And then there are a few other options that are closer to the city that are hybrids. So if I had my druthers, what would happen in my ideal world? What I'm trying to go for is build out, you know, my first conservation cemetery right outside of New York City in a place that's accessible by public transit, that can be affordable, that conserves land, all of that. But then really take it and scale it to other metropolitan areas. In an ideal world, anyone who wants a conservation burial should have access to it. Right now, many people don't, right? Because they're just too far.
Right.
Um, my of what I think the market could bear is 1 to 1.5% of people, would opt for it if it were available. And for me, that's, you might laugh at this, but that's based on the number of home births that people
Oh,
choose,
that's
right? So
interesting.
it's kind of like,
Oh, I mean,
Yeah, it's
that's
kind
an
of like the
interesting
home birth.
statistic that people who,
Yeah. Yeah. So if it were that volume, and it would need to be, within reasonable distance from where the population is. In my estimation, there should be about 400 in the United States. And like I mentioned, there's less than 20 now. So there's
oh,
huge
opportunity.
opportunity, yeah, to kind of build these. And, one of the arguments against full body burial and for cremation, right? As cremation is on the rise and more than half the people are cremated now. One of the arguments, I mean, there are several arguments for it, but one of the arguments is, land should be used for the living. Why are we wasting land on the dead? Like that kind of thing. But land is so important to life, and I really want to center it. And every community should have access to beautiful parkland where they can see and feel the trees and pollinators and see the flower, like that can be a burial ground. And should be, right? It's an opportunity for any community that really should have some example of the full cycle of life to, have one
I
within
think about,
easy
the
distance.
indigenous Native Americans and how
Yes.
they had specific burial grounds and those were
Yes.
sacred.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think what's really beautiful about natural burial is the fact that definitely the indigenous populations, as well as Jewish, Muslim, Catholic, Quaker, there's tons of belief systems that at the core of what they value and they believe in is this full cycle of life for it, right? Including death. And so it's a way to heal. It's a way to bring people together at a time when many people don't agree on very much,
Right.
unfortunately. I think people can get behind the environment, you know?
It just makes sense. I mean, the most natural
Yeah.
thing as humans is death. And
Yes.
why
Yes.
should we industrialize that experience for our final
Exactly.
disposition? It's beautiful. Well,
Exactly.
listen, this was an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. What are like one or two takeaways our listeners should be thinking about when the term now that they have the term conservation cemeteries in their planning process?
Um, yeah, absolutely. I mean, my goal isn't necessarily to convince people to do this. My goal is, I think it's a goal that you and I both share, is to get people talking about death as an inevitability, and therefore, let's make mindful decisions and let's try to make it align to our values as much as possible, right? And so, I think the takeaways that I'm hoping to impart are that this is a concept that people very hard um, to make into reality. And um, I would just like love people to just take a giant step back and really think about what it means to leave a legacy, to make a decision that's aligned to their values, and just normalize discussion about it. And so I've really appreciated talking about this with you. Thank you so much for this.
Oh, this was, like I said, to be able to really understand where we've come from and where we are today and the opportunities that we have for the future. This was an important conversation. So, HK, thank you so much for joining. Where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Um, they can find me at my website, Eon Woods, AEON Woods.org. Instagram, Eon Woods. I think I'm also on other social platforms, but I'm not that, I'm not as active elsewhere. So, um, yeah, I would welcome any and all conversations related to this. Thanks so much,
And
Nikki.
thank you. We'll end our call here. Appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.